don't you love your mama? There we go. That's good. Now, I want you to bring him to me like a dog. Like a dog. Good girl. Good girl. That's a... Look at Daddy. You see him? He loves it. He gets off on it. Look at your daddy. You love it? You like seeing this? I'm gonna take all the bullets out of this gun, but I'm gonna leave this one. Now, you undress one, and then I pull the trigger one. And you win when you don't have anything else to take off, okay? Look at this! Oh! Do it again, ready?
Yeah, let me explain.
Strip!
Okay, well, let me explain it.
Strip!
Oh my God!
Oh! One!
I took...
Two! Hurry up!
She's undressing.
Good girl, three.
In a secluded house in the suburbs of Georgia, Tanya and her daughter, Lika, are busy with household chores. Lika repeatedly begs her mother for a new phone, but Tanya explains that they simply have no money. Refusing to take no for an answer, Lika continues to push, hoping her mother will finally give in. Suddenly, a loud knock at the door startles them. Looking down from the balcony, they see a stranger who appears to be a lost American tourist. He explains that his GPS has died and he is completely lost. Tanya doesn't trust him, so she gives him quick directions in her broken English. However, the man claims he doesn't understand. Looking desperate, he begs for an old map he could borrow or buy instead. Tanya tells him they don't have one and tries to turn him away, but Lika, eager to show off her English, interrupts. She offers to print a map from her computer. Because of this, the stranger walks to the back of the house and climbs the stairs leading to the entrance. He introduces himself as Chris. He is charming and smiles often, causing the two women to let their guard down and welcome him inside. Lika prints the map and hands it over, but Chris makes no move to leave. Instead, he stops and sniffs the air, asking if there are any restaurants nearby. He mentions that their food smells delicious and admits he hasn't eaten in hours. Since they live in a remote area, there are no restaurants nearby. Feeling sympathetic, Lika invites him to stay for dinner without asking her mother's permission. Chris quickly accepts, and Tanya leads him further into the house to the dining table. He sits down and acts like the perfect guest, thanking them for their kindness. Meanwhile, at a nearby bee farm, Ilya is working when his dog's incessant barking interrupts him. Ilya knows this isn't a normal bark. To him, it signifies that danger is nearby. Since his wife and daughter are home alone and they rarely receive visitors, he gets worried. He quickly chains the dog to its house and rushes back to investigate. Upon reaching the porch, he finds a strange boot at the door. He cautiously walks inside, only to find a stranger sitting at his table, eating with his family. His wife and daughter immediately stand up to introduce him to Chris. But the moment Ilya recognizes the man, he becomes terrified. Chris smiles and greets Ilya by name. Tanya is shocked and asks how they know each other, but Chris quickly points to a drawing on the wall and claims he saw the name there. Ilya becomes visibly uncomfortable, and it is obvious he wants this man gone immediately, so he offers to drive Chris to the city right then. However, Chris isn't ready to go. He politely refuses and insists on finishing his meal first. Ilya doesn't want to appear suspicious or scare his wife, so he is forced to watch the man eat his food. But when Chris asks for more food, Ilya finally loses his temper and demands that Chris leave. Tanya thinks her husband is being rude, but she doesn't want an argument, so she finally tells Chris to go. As Chris grabs his bag, he stops and stares at Lika. He tells her how much he likes her name and her English, then pauses to compliment her necklace, wondering aloud where she got it. Ilya interrupts him, and finally the two men head out together, leaving the women behind. As the two men walk toward the gate, Ilya gives Chris a secret location and tells him to meet there in 1 hour to settle their business. He warns Chris to leave his family alone. Chris just gives a sarcastic smile and walks away as Ilya watches to make sure he is truly gone. The moment Chris drives away, Ilya rushes to release his guard dog and commands it to protect the house. He returns to the dining table, but he is too worried to eat. He leaves his family to be alone, waiting for the hour to pass. Suddenly, the dog starts barking hysterically. Then, there is total silence. Ilya calls out, but the dog doesn't come. He steps outside into the yard and finds fresh bloodstains on the grass. At that exact moment, a loud knock hits the door. Lika peeps through the window and sees Chris. She runs to open it, only to find Chris standing there covered in blood, carrying their dying dog. He claims it was an accident, that he ran the animal over while leaving. Ilya rushes into the chaos, and upon seeing his injured dog, he heads to the foyer and grabs his shotgun. However, he is unable to load it because the shells are missing. Even so, when Chris appears, Ilya points the gun at him anyway and threatens to shoot. Chris smiles and says he knows the gun is empty because he already stole the bullets. He then pulls out his own gun and shoots Ilya in the kneecaps. Tanya and Lika rush into the room and find Ilya on the ground, screaming in pain. Terrified, they beg Chris for mercy, promising to do whatever he says. Chris orders them to take Ilya inside, but Tanya struggles to lift him alone. Chris uses foul language to scream at Lika to help her mother. The girl cries as she and her mother drag a bleeding, broken Ilya toward the sofa, while Chris watches them with total control. Chris decides to break this family from the inside out. He tells Tanya to stand in the corner and forces Lika to tie her hands and feet, threatening to kill her if she hesitates. Once Tanya is helpless, Chris pulls out a pair of Lika's underwear. He asks Ilya who they belong to, hoping to shame him. Ilya tries to stay silent, but Lika is terrified for her father, so she screams out that they are hers. Ilya offers Chris money to just leave, but Chris laughs it off. He doesn't want Georgian money. Ilya begs for mercy, claiming he only hurt Chris because he was drunk. But this only makes Chris angrier. To ensure everyone can blame the bad choices they are about to make on alcohol, Chris grabs a bottle of liquor and offers it to the others. Since Ilya cannot drink, Chris pours the alcohol onto Ilya's bleeding kneecaps instead. Then, Chris commands Lika to follow his instructions and remove her underwear. Ilya pleads with Chris not to do this to his daughter. But Chris throws the underwear across the room and makes Lika crawl like a dog to retrieve it. He then stuffs it into Ilya's mouth, forcing him to taste it and orders him to keep it there. When Ilya drops the underwear, Chris threatens to place the gun in between Lika, forcing Ilya to stuff the cloth back into his mouth. Chris then grabs Lika and tells them about Alicia, the woman he loved. He says Alicia was severely wounded and in agonizing pain. He describes the torture of carrying her broken body for miles until he was too tired to walk. Even then, he kept crawling with her on his back until she finally died in his arms. Chris lets go of Lika and reveals that he found them because Ilya left his wallet right next to Alicia's dead body. Chris wants Ilya to confess his sins to his family, but Ilya stays silent. So, Chris decides to play a game with Lika to loosen him up. He calls it Stripper's Roulette. He empties his gun, leaving only one bullet. The rule is that Lika must undress. For every piece of clothing she removes, Chris will spin the cylinder and pull the trigger. If she is lucky, she stays alive. She wins the game when there is nothing left to take off. He clears a stage right in front of Ilya, but Lika is frozen with fear and refuses to move. This causes Chris to lose his patience. He starts spinning the cylinder and pulling the trigger spontaneously while demanding Lika remove her first garment as her parents scream in horror. Ilya crawls across the floor, begging to take her place, but Chris ignores him. Finally, Lika begins to comply. She takes off her first piece of clothing, hoping to end the nightmare. But the moment she does, Chris spins the cylinder and pulls the trigger, and Lika drops to the floor. Tanya and Ilya wail in despair as Chris stands there, frozen. He wanted revenge, but looking at the innocent girl's body, he is overwhelmed with regret. He realizes he has become the very monster he was trying to punish. From this point of view, you might think Chris just took an innocent life and completely destroyed a family. But Ilya is the one who started this war. Let's go back to the beginning. At the start of the story, Chris is in a truck with two people he calls his best friends, Daniel and Alicia. When Daniel jumps out of the truck for a moment, the tension inside immediately spikes. It turns out Chris and Alicia have been having a secret affair behind Daniel's back. To make matters worse, Daniel and Alicia are getting married this Saturday. Chris wants to confess everything, but Alicia begs him to keep quiet. She wants the affair to stay in the past, so Chris is forced to hide his feelings. Soon, they arrive at a beautiful hiking spot in the mountains of Georgia, and Daniel explains that this area was a war zone, so the ground is still filled with active landmines. As they hike deeper into the wilderness, Daniel makes a strange request. He wants Chris to marry them in an unofficial ceremony on top of a hill. Chris is still in love with Alicia, so standing there pretending to be happy for them feels like torture. He tries to say the words, but he stops halfway through because his jealousy is taking over. He urges them to continue the journey, noting that they are almost at their destination and it is getting late. That night, they set up camp and drink around a bonfire. Daniel is drunk and happy, but Chris remains cold and bitter. Daniel tries to cheer him up by promising to find him a girlfriend, which only makes Chris feel more alone. To end the awkwardness, Chris finally finishes reciting the wedding vows. Daniel and Alicia are thrilled, and they head into their tent to celebrate. Daniel disregards their privacy and begins undressing Alicia right in front of Chris. Although Alicia asks him to close the tent, Daniel only pretends to zip it shut. Chris is forced to sit by the fire and watch the woman he loves with his best friend. The sight of it destroys him. Unable to endure the pain any longer, he extinguishes the fire and disappears into the dark alone. The next morning, Chris wakes up to the sound of someone digging through their bags. He thinks it's a thief, so he attacks the man. But Daniel and Alicia quickly arrive and stop him. They claim the stranger is a park ranger named Devi and that he's a friend. Chris feels bad for the mistake and apologizes, so the tension seems to disappear. But Devi has a strange look in his eyes, a look that says something sinister is about to happen. Daniel says he wants to take a group photo to remember the trip and asks Devi to hold the camera. Devi takes the camera from Alicia and begins directing them, telling them to move just an inch this way or that. He claims he wants them in the perfect spot where the background is stunning. Suddenly, a loud click echoes through the air. Devi zooms in with the camera and warns Chris not to move a muscle. He has stepped directly onto a live landmine. Chris and Alicia panic as Daniel clears away the dirt and confirms the mine is real. Devi takes charge, instructing Daniel and Alicia to stay back for their own safety. He says he will run to the nearest town for help, though he warns it will take at least 4 hours. Daniel begs him to hurry. However, Devi does not go for help. Instead, he climbs a nearby hill and pulls out his binoculars to watch the tragedy unfold like a scene from a movie. Luckily, Daniel's phone rings, but the signal is weak. He and Alicia climb a high rock to search for a better connection. Alicia watches as Daniel appears to call an operator, desperately begging for a helicopter and landmine experts. Just as she feels a glimmer of hope, Daniel suddenly hangs up. He tells her the operator refused to help because they don't help sluts. Alicia is horrified but pretends not to understand his meaning. However, when they return to Chris, she discovers Chris had confessed to the affair a week ago, and Daniel has known everything all along. Alicia sheds a tear, hoping Daniel will still save Chris, but Daniel reveals the phone call was a complete act. There is no signal. He chose this remote spot specifically for this reason. Daniel then pulls a shovel from the bushes, revealing that this was no accident. It was planned long ago by him and Devi. He tells Alicia to start digging a trench for Chris, claiming that if Chris jumps into the hole when the mine detonates, he might survive. If not, it will be his grave. Chris is convinced his friend is merely playing a cruel prank, especially since Daniel had been standing safely beside him earlier. But then, Daniel pulls a long chain attached to the mine's pin. He admits the mine wasn't originally armed but reveals that it is now. He then tosses the pin away. As Daniel picks up his gear to leave, Alicia begs for mercy, claiming she loves him and not Chris. Daniel, no longer moved by her words, tells her to get to work and save her lover's life if she can. He walks away and meets Devi, who has found a vantage point to watch them suffer. However, Daniel decides he has seen enough. He tells Devi they should leave to get drinks and find some exotic dancers instead. Meanwhile, Alicia starts a smoke signal and finds the safety pin for the mine. She tries to shove it back in to deactivate the weapon, but it won't go in. She secretly pockets it and lies to Chris, telling him she successfully replaced it. She insists they still need to dig the trench Daniel suggested because she doesn't really know if the pin will work, and the trench will give them more chances to keep the odds in their favor. Suddenly, a hunter named Ilya appears with a massive dog. Seeing Alicia digging a hole, he assumes they are burying a body. Alicia is forced to fend off the dog to keep it from attacking Chris while screaming an explanation of their situation. Ilya doesn't believe them, so he fires a shot into the ground and orders Chris to step forward. When Chris stays frozen, Ilya begins to consider that the mine might be real. As a local who knows these woods, Ilya is their only hope. Alicia begs him to help dig the trench, but the man is suspicious and demands to know why she is out here with Chris instead of her husband. When she refuses to explain, Ilya suspects they are playing a prank on him, so he throws a rock at Chris to see if he will move. Alicia is furious, but Ilya grabs her by the arm and demands the truth as a condition for his help. Chris grows angry seeing Ilya put his hands on Alicia, but because they are desperate, Alicia is forced to confess the affair. Instead of helping, a disgusted Ilya calls Alicia a slut. Chris tells the hunter to leave, but Alicia ignores the insult and begs him to stay. Ilya finally agrees to help, but he demands something in return. They offer him all their belongings, and Ilya happily rummages through their bags. He finds a pair of Alicia's underwear and gives it to his dog to smell. After staring at the garment, he tells them that what he really wants is the pair she is currently wearing. Chris refuses and offers the $360 and a credit card in his pocket instead. But Ilya says he doesn't want American dollars. He wants her underwear, or he will leave. While Chris is fine with him walking away, Alicia shows Chris the pin and reveals that they desperately need the trench because the mine is still armed. She agrees to the deal and heads to her tent to change, but Ilya stops her, demanding she take them off in front of him to prove they are the right ones. After she complies, Ilya takes the garment and immediately smells it. Satisfied, Ilya begins to dig. Alicia explains that the trench must be 2 feet away and deep enough for Chris to jump in safely. As he works, a radio in his bag goes off. Ilya answers and speaks with a fellow hunter named Sergey. Sergey tells him that the soup is ready, and Ilya replies that he is currently helping 2 Americans. Alicia, Seeing this as a chance for a real rescue, begs to use the radio. Ilya refuses unless she plays a sick game. He throws her underwear across the dirt and tells her to fetch them. Alicia initially refuses and returns to digging, but she soon realizes she is too exhausted to finish the trench alone. She eventually picks up the underwear to hand it back, but Ilya throws it away again. He tells her to crawl on all fours like a dog to fetch it. Frustrated and desperate, Alicia crawls to the garment. When she tries to hand it over again, he tosses it a third time, remarking that dogs don't have hands. He demands she bring it to him using only her mouth. Alicia no longer argues. She picks the underwear up with her teeth and delivers it to him. Satisfied, Ilya hands her the radio, but the person on the other end is speaking a language she doesn't understand. She begs Ilya to translate, but he says he will only do so if she plays another game, one that requires her to undress completely. At this, Alicia's patience finally breaks, and she tells the hunter to leave. Alicia returns to digging, but Ilya soon interrupts her, claiming that Sergei is worried because he hasn't checked in. He forces her to pick up the radio and speak to Sergei to let him know he is fine. Alicia tries to relay the message, but Sergei doesn't understand English. In exchange for translating, Ilya demands they play a game. For every sentence he translates, Alicia must remove a piece of clothing. Alicia reluctantly accepts and removes her boots. Ilya speaks in Georgian to Sergei, telling him he is fine, but then claims Sergei thinks he is joking. This means they have to keep playing. Alicia tries to outsmart him, telling him to tell Sergei that he is coming home and doesn't need to be contacted again. After she removes another piece of clothing, they demand Ilya leave. The hunter grabs his bag and walks away. But just as Alicia breaks down in relief, Ilya returns, claiming Sergei is still talking about the soup and that he needs to translate more. When Alicia refuses to play anymore, Ilya snaps and draws his shotgun. Chris insults Ilya's mother to distract him, giving Alicia a gap to run when Ilya shifts his focus. However, Ilya releases his trained hunting dog to track her down, unknowingly leaving his shotgun behind as he runs after her. Chris slowly picks up the chain and attaches it to his belt buckle. He cleverly uses it to reach the shotgun and points it at Ilya just as the hunter returns, dragging Alicia with him. Ilya holds Alicia close, warning Chris that the blast radius will kill both of them if he fires. To prove he is still in control, Ilya cuts Alicia across her cheek with his knife, making Chris, who is still holding the gun, beg hopelessly. Ilya then drags Alicia behind a rock and assaults her. Chris is forced to watch the woman he loves endure unimaginable agony while he holds the gun, still unable to find a clear shot or move. Eventually, when Ilya becomes weary, Alicia finds the strength to fight back, hitting him with a rock. Chris sees his chance and shouts for Alicia to run toward him so he can get enough space to shoot. But at the exact second he pulls the trigger, the dog lunges at him. Chris falls backward into the trench, and the shotgun blast goes wild. Chris loses consciousness. When he wakes up, he hears Ilya laughing. Ilya reveals the landmine was a fake, mocking Chris by calling it a psychological trap, reinforced by Chris watching too many Hollywood movies. Ilya walks away, leaving Chris in the dirt. Right next to him is Alicia, covered in blood. The wild shot Chris fired when the dog attacked hit her in the neck. Alicia bleeds out and dies in his arms. Chris had accidentally killed the woman he loved because of the games Daniel and Ilya played. Now, the beginning of the story makes perfect sense. Chris showed up at Ilya's house to take his revenge, but by the time the final shot was fired, he was the only monster left in the room. The real tragedy is that Chris didn't just lose Alicia on that mountain, he lost his humanity. This story is a warning that revenge doesn't heal a wound, it just passes the pain to someone else. By taking an innocent life to balance the scales, Chris proved that when you fight a demon for too long, you eventually become one. Thanks for watching.